Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Wednesday, March 2nd, 2022. President Joe Biden following up his State of the Union address from Tuesday night with a visit to Superior, Wisconsin on the border with Minnesota, promoting his economic agenda, particularly infrastructure spending. He was joined by First Lady Jill Biden. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell making it clear that, to help fight inflation, the Fed will be raising interest rates this month. He testified on Capitol Hill. Supreme Court nominee Ketanji Jackson Brown starting meetings with senators one-on-one, senators that will be voting on her nomination, and also Senate Judiciary Committee Chair Dick Durbin announcing the confirmation hearing for Judge Jackson will begin March 21st. United Nations General Assembly overwhelmingly passing a resolution condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine, as reports from the war indicate that the Russian shelling of cities and the deaths of civilians continues to escalate. Secretary of State Antony Blinken continuing to hold open the prospect of diplomacy to resolve the conflict, but he says only if Russia pulls back its forces. And Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin canceling a planned test of an intercontinental ballistic missile. Contrast to Russian President Vladimir Putin's recently putting his country's nuclear arsenal on high alert. This from the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. With war raging overseas and inflation on the rise at home, President Joe Biden stopped in northern Wisconsin on Wednesday to tout his infrastructure plan that he said would bring jobs and investment to America for years. He spoke at the Yellow Jacket Union a day after he delivered a State of the Union address that argued the $1 trillion infrastructure package he signed in November will make America more competitive. Biden and other Democrats view infrastructure investments as a way to improve their standing with the public. Biden contending the country could beat inflation with him and improve the economy by reestablishing America as a center of manufacturing. Here's a portion of the president's remarks at the University of Wisconsin Superior.
Well, we know that despite this historic recovery, too many families are still struggling with higher costs. I get it. Our top priority must be getting prices under control. Look, our economy roared back faster than most predicted, but the pandemic meant businesses had a hard time hiring enough help to keep their workers in the production. The reason why the cost of housing went up in new housing is because no one was there to make sure they had the 2x4s to be built, to build the homes, because people weren't in the factories. And because people were making a lot more money than before, there was a lot of cash at hand, and they did not use that cash to go out to the restaurants or go on vacation. They used it for hard products. And the pandemic disrupted global supply chains. When factories close, it takes longer for goods to get from the warehouse to the stores, and prices go up. Look at cars. Last year, there weren't enough semiconductors to make all the cars people wanted to buy. They had the money to buy them. But there weren't literally enough cars, because we invented those chips when we went to the moon, but we didn't make them anymore. They're made in the rest of the world. So prices went way up. 1/3 of the reason for inflation was the cost of these additional cost of automobiles. So we have a choice. One way to fight inflation is to drive down wages and make Americans poorer. I have a better way to fight inflation. Lower your cost, not your wages. We're going to make more cars and semiconductors in America, more infrastructure and innovation in America, more goods moving faster and cheaper in America, more jobs that you can earn a living, a good living by here in America. Instead of relying on foreign supply chains, let's make it in America again. There's a lot more to my plan to lower costs and lower the deficit. By the way, we're going to lower the deficit by $1 trillion this year. These guys talk about how they always are worried about us spending. We're lowering the deficit. No one's ever done that. But look, I've kept you long enough. There's a lot more I'm inclined to say, and I don't want to get going. I don't want to get wound up here. But let me close with this. Look, I am truly more optimistic about America today than I've ever been. I really mean it. We're on a path to win the economic competition of the 21st century that we face with the rest of the world.
President Biden joined by First Lady Jill Biden at the University of Wisconsin Superior in Superior, Wisconsin, on the border with Minnesota today. A CBS News YouGov poll finding 78% of those surveyed who watched the president's State of the Union address on Tuesday approved of what he said. 22% disapproved. Given a list of feelings that they could apply to the speech, 67% of the Americans surveyed checked optimistic, and over 50% chose proud. On the other side, 20% said they felt pessimistic, 13% said they felt angry, and 9% said scared. Republican Senator John Cornyn of Texas taking to the Senate floor in Washington today to talk about what the president said last night on the economy and proposed spending.
The president alluded to inflation last night, but he didn't instill much confidence that he had a concept of what was at stake or how to solve the problem. When he talked about his plan to address inflation, he said, we need to cut our expenses and overhead. Well, I talked to some of the cotton producers in Texas last week when I was home, and they told me that one of the biggest problems they have are increasing costs of their inputs, things like diesel and energy, fertilizer, and the like. They don't have any room to cut their overhead unless they go out of business entirely. So the president did not inspire much confidence when it came to dealing with the scourge of inflation. But one thing we can do is quit making it worse by trying to continue to shovel more and more money out the door, chasing fewer and fewer goods and services. The president did try to recycle some of the elements of the Build Back Better, or as I like to call it, the Build Back Broke bill. But that bill, that policy is dead and buried. The president couldn't even get support among his own political party, but he did try to rebrand it and respond to it in a way, rebranded in a way that it appeared to deal with the concerns that everybody has about increasing costs and inflation. But it just did not make any sense. The president repeated the same line that's already been shot down a number of times. He talked about raising taxes on the American people, and he says no one earning $400,000 a year or less would pay a penny more under his plan. But of course, this is the same president that said that the price of the $5 trillion Build Back Better bill was zero. I think the president's lost a lot of credibility when it comes to talking about taxes and spending. Well, what the president talked about last night was really a laundry list of his liberal agenda. This isn't a new plan. This is the same old plan with a new name, broken down into smaller pieces. None of this is going to address what is confronting the American people today when it comes to inflation, or crime, or the border, or regaining America's leadership and credibility in world affairs.
Senator John Cornyn, Republican from Texas, on the Senate floor today. The Hill newspaper writes that Senator Joe Manchin, Democrat from West Virginia, who torpedoed President Biden's Build Back Better agenda at the end of last year, on Wednesday laid out a dramatically scaled-down version that he says he could vote for under the special budget reconciliation process. Manchin said he could support a reconciliation package that reforms the tax code and lowers the cost of prescription drugs if the money raised is split between spending on new climate change proposals and deficit reduction and fighting inflation. West Virginia Senator clarified he hasn't made any formal counterproposal to the White House, but is sketching the outlines of a proposal that he could support along with the rest of the Senate Democratic caucus. That story from thehill.com. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell confirming today that interest rates will begin increasing in the middle of this month for the first time since 2018 in an effort to get a handle on rising inflation. Powell testifying before the House Financial Services Committee. Here's a question from the ranking Republican Patrick McHenry of North Carolina.
Everyone else on the Open Market Committee, it seems, has opined about the March meeting. Everyone. Whether it's a tweet or an interview or anything else. What are your thoughts going into the March meeting?
The March meeting. Okay, so here's how I'm thinking about the March meeting. And I guess I would start, of course, with the U.S. economy, which is very strong, the labor market extremely tight, and inflation running well above target. The way we think about our work is we develop working plans for making adjustments to monetary policy over the course of the coming months, and then we are flexible as plans meet the real world. So we're never on autopilot, obviously, and at a time like this, what we aim to do is lay out our principles and then, with whatever clarity we do have, and then proceed to implement those policies carefully and nimbly. So coming into this meeting, let's say before the Ukraine invasion, the committee was set to raise our policy rate, the first of what was to be a series of raises expected for this year. Every meeting was live. Decisions would be based on incoming data and the evolving outlook. I also expected we'd make great progress on our plan to begin to shrink the balance sheet. And so the question now really is how the invasion of Ukraine, the ongoing war, the response from nations around the world, including sanctions, may have changed that expectation. And so it's too soon to say for sure, but for now, I would say that we will proceed carefully along the lines of that plan. The thing is, the economic effects of these events are highly uncertain. So far, we've seen energy prices move up further, and those increases will move through the economy and push up headline inflation, and also they're going to weigh on spending. We're seeing effects on other commodities and perhaps from declining risk sentiment and weaker growth abroad. The thing is, we can't know how large or persistent those effects will be. That simply depends on events to come. So this is where that leaves me. I do think it will be appropriate to raise our target range for the federal funds rate at the March meeting in a couple of weeks, and I'm inclined to propose and support a 25 basis point rate hike. We're also going to write down our new summary of economic projection, individual forecasts, which will show each participant's views of the path forward in the economy and with rates. I also expect that at this meeting, we'll make good progress toward an agreement on a plan to shrink the balance sheet. We will not finalize that plan at this meeting. We'll do that when we think the time is right at a coming meeting. The bottom line is that we will proceed, but we will proceed carefully as we learn more about the implications of the Ukraine war for the economy. We use our tools to support financial stability and macroeconomic stability. We're going to avoid adding uncertainty to what is already an extraordinarily challenging and uncertain moment. So that's how I would think about it.
The Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell before the House Financial Services Committee. That Fed meeting scheduled this month, March 15th and 16th. Wall Street today, the Dow up 596 points, NASDAQ up 219, S&P up 80. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg testifying before the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee today about implementing the $1 trillion infrastructure law touted by the President in the State of the Union address last night and also in Wisconsin today. Associated Press reports the federal government has a fresh warning to states seeking billions of dollars from the infrastructure law to widen roads, protect the safety of pedestrians and bicyclists, or risk losing funds. In a new report submitted to Congress obtained by AP, the Department of Transportation says it will aim to prioritize the safety and health of the multiple users of a typical 21st century roadway, from riders of public transit and electric scooters to Uber rideshare pickups and people delivering goods. Senator Tom Carper, Democrat from Delaware, is chair of the committee, asking the Transportation Secretary about this.
Can you tell us any more about why the department has encouraged states to consider prioritizing projects to address safety, to address road and bridge construction and emissions? Why?
Well, we view these as common sense and longstanding policy goals, and goals that we share with so many of the state transportation leaders we speak to. So under the law, and as we seek to implement it, of course, states decide what projects to build with their federal formula funds. We believe that thoughtful road investments are vital to achieving those safety, equity, and climate goals. Notably, the American Association of State Highway Transportation Officials, AASHTO, which represents the state transportation departments and which I know you've been in touch with even this week as they gather, wrote about how states very much share FHWA's policy priorities outlined in this guidance. The states are making these investments not because of any ideological tilt one way or the other, but because they are often more affordable in the short term, more cost-effective in the medium term, and yield better outcomes for travelers and for movement of goods and for communities in the long term. So what we're really seeking to do is work with states on the investments that are going to create the most bang for that federal taxpayer buck, while recognizing, of course, that context matters and that what is appropriate in one community or state will be different than what's appropriate in another.
The Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg testifying before the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee. We covered this hearing, and you can find the video in its entirety at our website, cspan.org. Senator Chuck Grassley, Republican from Iowa, putting out a press release today that reads, "Last night, President Joe Biden urged Congress to limit the supply of illicit drugs and tackle the opioid crisis in his State of the Union address. Despite this, and the dangerous and deadly consequences posed by fentanyl, today Senate Democrats rejected Grassley's effort to maintain fentanyl's Schedule I status before it expires next Friday, March 11th. Democrats supported previous extensions of the same authority 5 times in the past 4 years." That was the press release from Senator Grassley. Here's how it happened on the Senate floor. We start with Senator Grassley.
Today's vote on this bill, as amended, should be a yes for every member of the Senate. This measure extends the life-saving authority placing fentanyl drugs in Schedule I. In fact, a 15-month extension of this authority, similar to the bill that I offer right now, passed the Senate, and it passed the Senate unanimously in 2020. In case that you've not read the headlines for the past few years, fentanyl and its analogs are killing tens of thousands of Americans each year, and it happens that fentanyl and analogs are now the #1 cause of deaths for Americans ages 18 to 45, the most productive years of a person's life. The Drug Enforcement Administration placed fentanyl analogs in Schedule I in the year 2018. Congress has already extended this authority, like I'm seeking today, 5 times in 4 years. Now we're on the verge of extending it for a 6th time before it expires on March the 11th.
Senator Chuck Grassley on the Senate floor. After he finished, Senator Cory Booker, Democrat from New Jersey, did object to the attempt to pass this bill by unanimous consent. Senator Booker, though, making some remarks first.
I agree with the senator's sense of urgency. We cannot tolerate one more death. We have to address this public health crisis. But with this goal in mind, I cannot support the bill as it is offered today, because extending the temporary scheduling of fentanyl analogs alone is a failed experiment. We have seen scheduling, this temporary scheduling. We're in it right now. Class-wide scheduling has not curbed the overdoses. In fact, overdoses have increased during the period that fentanyl analogs have been scheduled by nearly 40% from June 2019 to May 2020. Now, here's what makes it even worse. As a result of just blanket class-wide scheduling, this broad sweep approach, the FDA recently testified that there is a potential life-saving antidote to these fentanyl analogs called basically a stronger version of naloxone. This has been placed, that stronger version has been placed because of this blanket scheduling as a Schedule I. The FDA knows that this could actually endanger more people. Why, in the midst of a public health crisis, are we criminalizing the next naloxone instead of rushing it to the hands of researchers for study and evaluation? When you put something at Schedule I, it's this declaration that doesn't even have any health benefits.
Senator Cory Booker on the Senate floor before he did object to Senator Grassley's unanimous consent to pass his bill to keep fentanyl status as a Schedule I drug, which is defined as a drug or other substance that has a high chance of being abused or causing addiction and is no FDA-approved medical use in the United States. The Senator Grassley offering this because he said that President Biden on Tuesday night in the State of the Union address did make as part of a proposed unity agenda for the nation. One of them was new programs tackling the opioid epidemic. President Biden's Supreme Court nominee, federal Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, also mentioned prominently in the State of the Union speech, today beginning one-on-one meetings with senators, including the Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, the Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, and the chair and ranking member on the Judiciary Committee. The chair of the committee is Democrat Dick Durbin of Illinois. He held a news conference after his meeting to talk about the nominee and the hearing schedule.
I just had an opportunity to sit down with Ketanji Brown Jackson, the nominee of President Biden to be on the Supreme Court and fill the Stephen Breyer vacancy. It's not the first time we met. In fact, it's not the first time she was in my office. She was there, we're trying to guess, in 2011 as a member of the Sentencing Commission. I had passed a reform of sentencing on crack cocaine, and she was a member of the Sentencing Commission, which ultimately unanimously decided to make that decision retroactive. It included support of conservative Republicans and others on a bipartisan basis. Let me tell you why I believe that this woman is ready to make history in America. She has an extraordinary background. If you're going to be the first in America, you better bring credentials to the task, and she does. She has been an outstanding law student, an outstanding clerk for 3 different levels of the judiciary, including for the retiring Justice Stephen Breyer. She has been before this Judiciary Committee. This will be her 4th time. She's been before it 3 different times, successfully with bipartisan support approved by the Judiciary Committee. The most recent was just this last year when she was approved for the D.C. Circuit Court. Every single time she's come before the committee, she's had bipartisan support. That is quite a source of pride in this day and age with the contentious partisanship that we have. She's an amazing person personally. We talked about her background and things that she had been through. And I would say that she's in a position now where she's prepared to come before the committee and before the Senate and to win the nomination officially before the Senate. I want to say a word about the timing of this. She is going to be have a hearing before the committee on March the 21st. I informed Senator Grassley of that this morning, and he is taking it to his caucus to announce that that is the date that we chose. He didn't choose that date. It was chosen by the Democratic majority. Let me tell you why I believe it is fair. That will be the 24th day after President Biden's announcement of this nominee. The hearing begins on March 21st. It has been less than a year since she was before the committee and considered for her current judgeship. In comparison, Amy Coney Barrett came before the committee 16 days after President Trump's announcement. In this case, it's 24 days. And secondly, Judge Barrett had been on the bench 3 years, so it had been 3 years between the consideration of the Judiciary Committee for her circuit position and the Supreme Court approval. In this case, Judge Jackson will have been less than a year when she comes in for a hearing. I'm looking forward to this. It's an awesome responsibility and possibly the greatest responsibility of the Senate Judiciary Committee to advise and consent to a president's nominee for a lifetime appointment to the highest court on the land. I want this to be fair, timely, and professional. I am going to beseech my colleagues on both sides to keep this at a high level of discourse because we are considering issues of great constitutional moment and issues that are very important for the future of this country.
That's Senator Dick Durbin, Democrat from Illinois, chair of the Judiciary Committee, at a news conference after his meeting with the Supreme Court nominee, Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. The committee ranking Republican, Senator Durbin referred to him, Chuck Grassley, and he spoke with reporters as he was meeting with the nominee.
Welcome and congratulate Judge Jackson, very much so. It's quite an honor for her, but it's quite an honor for me to meet and have a few minutes to talk to her. Besides congratulating her, it's I presume it'd be the epitome of what it is to be a judge or a lawyer and a judge in private practice and on 2 levels of courts already. I think we should all know that you learn a lot from past Supreme Court cases. And one of the things that would be my responsibility as leaders of the Republican on this committee is to make sure that we have a fair process, a dignified process, and that we will make sure that that we don't repeat some of the mistakes that were made by other people in the Kavanaugh hearing. And I just think that we're going to meet our constitutional responsibility of advice and consent with dignity and fairness, and most importantly, thoroughness. Everybody expects us to do our job the right. So that's all I have to say, folks.
Thank you, guys.
The Senate Judiciary Committee ranking Republican Chuck Grassley as he began his meeting with Supreme Court nominee Ketanji Brown Jackson. Again, according to the chair of the Judiciary Committee, Senator Dick Durbin, the hearings begin March 21st with statements from the senators on the Judiciary Committee, and then the people who will be introducing the nominee, and then the nominee herself. Senators' questions begin the next day, Tuesday, March 22nd, and will go into Wednesday, March 23rd. And then on Thursday, March 24th, there will be outside witnesses testifying from the American Bar Association and other legal experts and interested parties who are invited. This will all be live on the C-SPAN networks. Washington Today continues in a minute.
There's been much more recognition of the historic contributions of America's First Ladies in recent years. So join us as C-SPAN takes you through the White House experiences of modern First Ladies, from Lady Bird Johnson through Melania Trump. Using material from C-SPAN's award-winning biography series First Ladies and original source material from C-SPAN's video library, you'll listen to reflections of these first spouses explaining how they use their platform to address issues important to them and to the country.
I think everyone that comes to this job comes with a special interest. I was a teacher and a librarian. That's really where I focused a lot, especially at the first, on developing the National Book Festival and helping the president with the No Child Left Behind Act, because that was my expertise, that was my career, and what I'd been interested in my whole life. But I will say that sometimes First Ladies are trivialized by what we call a pet project. And in fact, our contributions to the United States from First Ladies in many, many cases are much more profound than that term.
First Ladies in Their Own Words. Find it wherever you listen to podcasts starting March 5th.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile video app and wherever you get your podcasts. From NBC News, the UN General Assembly voted Wednesday to reprimand Russia over its invasion of Ukraine and demand that Moscow stop fighting and withdraw its military forces. The General Assembly voted 141 in favor and 5 opposed, with 35 nations abstaining on the draft resolution titled Aggression Against Ukraine, which was co-sponsored by 94 countries. Russia vetoed a similar draft resolution last week from the United Nations Security Council. That from NBC News. President Joe Biden mentioning this during his trip to Superior, Wisconsin today.
A vote in the United Nations to condemn Putin. 141 countries voted to do that in the UN General Assembly. Several abstained. China abstained. Didn't vote with them, but abstained. India abstained. 7 countries abstained, I think it was the number. They're alone. And they did what they did, in my view. He did what he did because he thought he could split NATO, split Europe, and split the United States. We're going to demonstrate to the whole world, no one can split this country.
President Biden in Wisconsin. The U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas Greenfield, spoke to reporters at the UN in New York City after the vote.
Today, the world has spoken with a clear, united voice. Together, the vast majority of the world has condemned Russia's unprovoked, unjustified, unconscionable war. We have deplored Belarus for allowing its territory to be used to facilitate this aggression. We have affirmed Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. We have demonstrated that Russia is isolated and alone. And that's the cost, that the costs will keep rising until Russia relents. We have affirmed the UN Charter, pledged to address the horrific human rights and humanitarian crisis in Ukraine, and stood together in the battle for the soul of the world. Last night, at his State of the Union address, President Biden commended the courage of the Ukrainian people. He declared that the United States of America stands with Ukraine, and quoted President Zelensky when he said, "Light will win over darkness." Today at the United Nations, light has won over darkness. 141 states voted to support this amendment. The world, as President Biden said, is choosing the side of peace and security. Now, as the situation grows graver, every day in Ukraine, we must keep the momentum going. We must do everything we can to help the Ukrainian people, to hold Russia accountable, to match our strong words with strong actions. Let us continue to come together to support the Ukrainian people, and let us demonstrate the true power and true purpose of the United Nations for all. Thank you very much.
How satisfied are you with the fact that 141 countries supported the resolution? Did you expect that?
We worked for that.
Is the number the right one? What about the humanitarian resolution? Sorry.
That's still up for discussion.
When do you think you are going to vote?
I can't give
but
you
it's above the the numbers of abstention, the numbers.
We would have hoped that the 35 people who abstained would have voted yes with us as well. So it was not at our expectation. We would have hoped for more. Thank you.
Linda Thomas Greenfield, U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, speaking with reporters at the UN in New York City. From the Associated Press, they write the Kremlin will not end its military activities in Ukraine. Russia's ambassador to the United Nations, Vasily Nebenzia, warned Wednesday ahead of the vote. Instead, he and Russia, he said, were trying to stop the war in Ukraine's eastern regions of Donetsk and Luhansk, known collectively as the Donbass, both controlled by Russian-backed separatists. Nebenzia added that Russia was not carrying out strikes on civilian facilities and civilians. Don't believe the large number of fakes spread around the internet about this, he said. These fakes are distributed like biscuits. They were distributed by Ukraine. That from the Associated Press. In Washington, D.C., an update by the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken. Here are some questions from Andrea Mitchell, NBC News Chief Washington Correspondent and Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent.
You just quoted the president saying big nations don't bluff. Do you think that President Putin is bluffing by putting his nuclear forces on alert? And I had another question, if you don't mind. Are you surprised that we have not seen more? We've seen some denial of services, but are you surprised that we have not seen a more massive cyber attack against Ukraine or against other of the NATO nations or against us? Do you think that the legislation that just passed improves our ability to defend against such attacks? And if I could impose on you one more question. I talked today to Daria Kaleniuk, who is part of the president in your democracy summit this year. And you know how passionate she is, perhaps. You saw her questioning. And she says that despite everything that has been done, and I would say it's an extraordinary amount of coordination and agreement with the allies, it's not going to get there in time. That convoy is sitting outside Kyiv and poised to encircle Kyiv, and they're not going to get those supplies. What more can be done to help those people?
Andrea, thank you. Let me take them in not quite reverse order. First, just on the cyber piece, two things. First, yes, the legislation that you referred to is extremely helpful. But beyond that and before that, we have been very focused on the potential for cyber attacks, not only against Ukraine, but against us, against allies and partners. We've been working for months, first with Ukraine, and also among ourselves, to harden, to sharpen defenses. All of that work is very much underway, including with the private sector. And so I think we have to be very much on guard about that possibility. We are. With regard to assistance to Ukraine, here's what I can tell you. We are very actively working every day, every hour to provide that assistance and to make sure that to the best of our ability it gets to where it needs to go. And this is not just us, this is many countries in Europe. We're coordinating a lot of efforts to do that, and my own assessment right now is that the vitally needed assistance is getting to where it needs to go. With regard to President Putin's statements on Russia's nuclear posture, first, as you know, Russia and the United States have long agreed that the actual use of nuclear weapons would be devastating and have devastating consequences for the entire world. And as we've stated many times, including earlier this year, following the meeting between President Biden and President Putin in Geneva, both of our countries have stated that a nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. That was a key reaffirmation coming out of the meeting between President Biden and President Putin back in June. Provocative rhetoric about nuclear weapons is the height of irresponsibility. It's dangerous. It adds to the risk of miscalculation. It needs to be avoided. We've assessed President Putin's directive and his statements, and at this time we see no reason to change our own alert levels.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken, part of his news conference today at the State Department in Washington. Senator Jim Risch, Republican from Idaho, ranking member on the Foreign Relations Committee, has been trying this week unsuccessfully to pass his bill to increase sanctions on Russia for its invasion of Ukraine and also provide more military and humanitarian aid to Ukraine. Today, Senator Risch holding a news conference on Capitol Hill with other Senate Republicans.
At this perilous time, we feel obliged to do all we possibly can to preserve the lives of Ukrainians that are perishing every day, women, children, civilians. I applaud the sanctions the President has put in place. These are indeed good steps. But the sanctions have not deterred Putin's military, and we believe we must do more. We must sanction all of Russia's banks and appropriate industries and include secondary sanctions. With Nord Stream 2 shut down, we now must help end Europe's dependence on Russian oil and gas for good. The President should rescind his executive order from last year that shut down oil and gas production in the United States to a large degree, and then we can help Europe. We support the weapons and other assistance that the President has provided to the Ukrainian military, and I have immediately, as ranking member of the Foreign Relations Committee, signed off on every request to send weapons immediately when it was presented. There's a 40-mile convoy of Russian tanks stalled outside of Kiev. They have not been destroyed because we have not supplied enough weapons to the Ukraine. Again, we must do more. Biden's emergency supplemental request seeks to raise the cap for additional weapons to $350 million. My Democratic colleagues here have opposed raising this cap. Indeed, we support the $350 million plus more, really. The NET Act that Republicans supported contained a resistance fund to help Ukrainians counter Russian influence and provide other military assistance to the Ukrainians that they may need. My colleagues, on the other hand, up here have opposed this fund all along. The Ukrainians are demonstrating why such funds are needed. Putin is showing he will not be deterred without more action by the West. It is time we drop the hammer and completely shut down the economy in Russia, and that we do more to assist the Ukrainian defenses. The other side has complained that Republicans are being partisan. That could not be further from the truth. Let me be clear here. When it comes to the bottom line, when it comes to the objective of what we're trying to do here, Republicans and Democrats are united. We do have differences on how to execute. We do have differences on the details of what it's going to take to get this done. But we're all united to accomplish the bottom line here.
Senator Jim Risch is Foreign Relations Committee ranking Republican at a news conference today with other Senate Republicans who have joined him in sponsoring this bill that he has introduced dealing with Russian sanctions and aid to Ukraine. It is named the NYET Act, N-Y-E-T, the acronym for Never Yielding Europe's Territory, and of course NYET, the Russian word for no. Reuters has that the United States is open to imposing sanctions on Russia's oil and gas flows, but going after its exports now could help Moscow, the White House said on Wednesday, as oil prices surged to a new 11-year high and supply disruptions mounted. Spokesperson Karine Jean-Pierre saying at a briefing, "We don't have a strategic interest in reducing global supply of energy. That would raise prices at the gas pump for Americans." Another Republican U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham joining a Republican member of the House, Victoria Spartz, who was born in Ukraine, to introduce a resolution urging the International Criminal Court and International Court of Justice to investigate Russian President Vladimir Putin for war crimes and crimes against humanity. Here's Senator Graham.
There are many fronts that we can fight on here. We want to hurt Putin and we want to help the Ukraine, right? Well, how do you help the Ukraine? You give them food and you give them fuel, you help their economy, you give them weapons to fight with, but you also rally around their complaint against Putin being a war criminal. How do you hurt him the most? Subject him to the rule of law. There is no rule of law in Russia. There is no other place to take this complaint to other than the International Criminal Court. So I'm hoping that Republicans and Democrats will speak with one voice when it comes to the rule of law, that what Putin is doing is a war crime. So there are 4 types of crimes that the International Criminal Court deals with: genocide, crimes against humanity, violations of the laws or customs of war, that's my lane, grave breaches of the Geneva Convention. I promise you, there's ample evidence that there's a breach of the Geneva Convention, that the customs and laws of war are being violated, that cluster bombs dropped on civilians is not legal in this world. Now, the rule of law and war are always difficult. People say, why do you even think about law when it comes to war? Because that's what makes us different than other groups. That we do believe in America following the law of war, and we should hold those accountable who do not.
That's Senator Lindsey Graham at a news conference on Capitol Hill. He is a Republican from South Carolina, joined by Congresswoman Victoria Spartz, Republican from Indiana. She was born in Ukraine. The video of that full news conference is available at cspan.org. Russia's defense ministry giving its first report of military casualties since the invasion. The defense ministry is saying that 498 Russian service members have been killed and that 1,597 have been wounded. Ukraine claims more than 5,300 Russian troops have died. Ukraine's State Emergency Service is also saying about 2,000 civilians in the country have been killed or are unaccounted for. Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby at his briefing today with an announcement from the Defense Secretary about a test of a missile that can deliver nuclear weapons.
I often come out here and tell you what we have done, both in terms of exercises and operations. Today, I want to talk a little bit about something that we are not going to do, and I want to explain why. Last weekend, as you saw, President Putin directed a special alert of Russian nuclear forces. Now, in this time of heightened tensions, the United States and other members of the international community rightly saw this as a dangerous and irresponsible, and as I've said before, an unnecessary step. Both the United States and Russia have long agreed that nuclear employment could have devastating consequences. And we both agreed, most recently this year, in the context of the P5 statement, that a nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. Such provocative rhetoric and possible changes to nuclear posture involving the most consequential weapons in our respective arsenals is unacceptable. The United States has not taken any similar steps. And so in an effort to demonstrate that we have no intention in engaging in any actions that could be misunderstood or misconstrued, the Secretary of Defense has directed that our Minuteman III intercontinental ballistic missile test launch, scheduled for this week, to be postponed. And we did not take this decision lightly, but instead to demonstrate that we are a responsible nuclear power. This is not a step backwards in our readiness, nor does it imply that we will necessarily cancel other routine activities to ensure a credible nuclear capability. We remain confident in our strategic posture, as we've said before, and our ability to defend the homeland and our allies and our partners remains fully intact and ready. We recognize at this moment of tension how critical it is that both the United States and Russia bear in mind the risk of miscalculation and take steps to reduce those risks.
Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby, part of his opening statement at his briefing with reporters in the Pentagon briefing room. During President Biden's State of the Union address Tuesday night, there was a standing ovation from both Republican and Democratic members of the House and Senate when he introduced the Ukrainian ambassador to the United States, who was sitting in the balcony. It happened again today in Great Britain, when the Speaker of the House of Commons, Lindsay Hoyle, welcomed Ukraine's ambassador to that country.
I want to welcome to our gallery the Ukraine ambassador. Your right. Your Excellency, we generally do not allow applause in this chamber. But on this occasion, the House quite rightly wants to demonstrate our respect and support for your country and its people in the most difficult of times. Before we start, I would like to point out the British Sign Language interpretation proceedings available to watch on Parliament Live TV. We now come to questions, Prime Minister. I call Graham Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question 1.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday I was in Warsaw and Tallinn, reaffirming our commitment to NATO and our solidarity with Ukraine. Putin has gravely miscalculated. In his abhorrent assault on a sovereign nation, he has underestimated the extraordinary fortitude of the Ukrainian people and the unity and resolve of the free world in standing up to his barbarism. The UN General Assembly will vote later today, and we call on every nation to join us in condemning Russia and demanding that Putin turn his tanks around. If instead Putin doubles down, then so shall we, further ratcheting up economic pressure and supporting Ukraine with finance, with weapons and with humanitarian assistance. Today, the Disasters and Emergency Committee is launching its Ukraine appeal, and every pound donated by the British people will be matched by the government, starting with £20 million.
The British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, the start of Prime Minister's Question Time in the House of Commons in London. Fox Business has this. Chelsea Football Club owner Roman Abramovich announced Wednesday he's decided to sell the club and will set up a fund in order for the proceeds of the sale to benefit victims of the Ukraine war. The article goes on. Abramovich, the Russian oligarch who is worth more than $13 billion, had been under pressure to sell the team amid the furor over Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Back to Washington, and comedian and advocate and activist Jon Stewart on Capitol Hill again to help shepherd through a bill to help veterans exposed to toxic burn pits. It's a cause that President Biden raised in Tuesday night's State of the Union address. Stewart at a news conference with members of Congress outside the Capitol building, urging them to defeat an expected attempt by House Veterans Affairs Committee ranking Republican Mike Bost to substitute what's on the floor for a bill that passed the Senate. Here's Jon Stewart.
We are at Congress. This is a place where what is necessary becomes what they can get away with. And we can't allow that to happen in this final moment of their fight. They're going to go on the floor tomorrow, and there's going to be an amendment. And that amendment from Ranking Member Bost is going to say, hey, all these veteran service organizations and all these active military members have come together with Chairman Takano and Speaker Pelosi and the President of the United States, and they have designed a bill that will comprehensively address the urgent need in the veterans community. And Ranking Member Bost's amendment is going to say, damn, that's good work. So why don't we just switch that out for 5 more years of health care? We good? Thanks, guys. We're good. That. Not happening. They get what they deserve, the comprehensive bill that addresses the urgent need in their community. And the Senate pulls the same shenanigans. And so once this is done, make no mistake, then the battle shifts to the Senate. And as you know, they are excellent at killing things that are necessary. And we cannot allow it to happen. And you cannot allow this feeling of unity and hope and finally being seen to dissipate. We need all of your help to put the pressure on to make sure that the comprehensive needs that they have are passed. The VA is starting to take notice. They're starting to create the process. The president has taken notice. This Congress has taken notice, and we will not rest until it's done. So I can't thank you guys enough for the inspiration you brought to me and the hope that you've brought to the veterans of this country, and not only the 3.5 that served in the war on terror, but since Vietnam and all that. This culture has to change. And you know what, man? If we can't bear the consequences of war, maybe we should consider not starting so many. Thank you.
Jon Stewart, former host of The Daily Show, a comedian and activist on this issue. Today on Capitol Hill, a news conference that also included House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Congressman Mark Takano, the Veterans Affairs Committee chair. Stewart referring to an amendment expected to be offered, he said, tomorrow by Congressman Mike Bost, ranking Republican on the Veterans Affairs Committee. Turns out that amendment was offered today and offered by another member, Congresswoman Marionette Miller Meeks, Republican from Iowa. Here she is on the House floor.
Thank you. I rise today to discuss Ranking Member Bost's amendment to replace the PACT Act with the Health Care for Burn Pit Veterans Act. The Health Care for Burn Pit Veterans Act is a bipartisan legislation that has already passed in the Senate. It would expand health care for toxic exposed veterans by extending VA's enhanced combat eligibility period from 5 to 10 years. That would give post 9/11 combat veterans a decade after leaving the military to enroll in VA care without having a service-connected disability rating or a low income. Those who have been out of the military for more than a decade would be able to enroll during a 1-year open enrollment period. The bill would also improve training for VA staff on how to recognize and treat toxic exposure, research on the impact of toxic exposure, and outreach about the resources available to veterans regarding toxic exposure. CBO has estimated that the bill would cost $1 billion in discretionary funding over 10 years. That is in stark contrast to over $300 billion discretionary and mandatory cost of the PACT Act. The Health Care for Burn Pit Veterans Act would not expand compensation benefits for toxic exposed veterans. I appreciate the importance of benefits. That's why Ranking Member Bost and I remain committed to working across the aisle and Capitol to improve benefits for toxic exposed veterans. The framework that the PACT Act establishes to do that, however, is unworkable. And I'm afraid the PACT Act will stall without a clear path forward in the Senate. I don't want to let perfect be the enemy of good on an issue as important as this one. I also don't want to let this Congress go by without helping veterans who are sick and dying from toxic exposure. As a veteran and as a doctor who has cared for sick and dying patients, that would be an unacceptable outcome for me.
Congresswoman Marionette Miller Meeks on the House floor. Her amendment, she offered it on behalf of Congressman Bost. There was a vote on it, and it failed. Vote was 203 to 223, mostly party line, Republicans voting yes, except for 4 who voted no, with all the Democrats. The bill will be finished up on Thursday, a final passage vote expected in the House. Thanks for listening today to Washington Today. You can get more Washington top stories sent right to you each day by subscribing to C-SPAN's evening newsletter, Word for Word. Go to c-span.org/connect to sign up. Hope you have a good night.